Welcome to Live at 5, sponsored by the Scene Makers Board. My name is Dijon Smith, and I've been a Scene Makers Board member for the last 5 years. Thank you so much for joining this special event celebrating the Goodman's Live series in partnership with the Museum of Broadcast Communications. Before we get into this exciting discussion, we'd like to share with you a bit more about the Scene Makers Board. We are a group of young professionals dedicated to support the Goodman from the inside out. Our events and fundraisers not only support the groundbreaking work done on stage and special events like this conversation, but also the amazing education and engagement initiatives put on by the Goodman to support students across the city. Without further ado, please welcome Ike Holter, Willa J. Taylor, Susy Schultz, Christopher Oscar Peña, and Mary Beth Fisher. Thank you.
Thank you, Dijon, for that great welcome and that great opening. The work that the Scene Makers does is really incredible, and I'm thrilled that you are able to put this incredible panel together. I'm Willa Taylor. I am the Walter Director of Education and Engagement here at the Goodman Theater, and I'm thrilled that I can be here for this conversation with this august panel today. You know, one of the things that has always set us apart as theater artists was the sort of ephemeral nature of our work. Even in a production run of thousands of shows like Cats or Phantom of the Opera, each evening show is immediate and unique. And in this kind of on-demand binging and endless streaming world, that is something that we have always prided ourselves on. But what happens when a pandemic forces theaters to shut their doors to the public and have to rely on archival video captures to continue to produce work? How do we adapt? If you are Goodman Theater, you not only dig into the archives for some incredible work like our Death of a Salesman, but we come up with new producing models. And that's what we did with our live series. And that's the topic of our discussion tonight, the intersection between sort of stage and screen. How have we blurred the lines? Is theater online real theater? What can we learn from TV and film and radio even to make our virtual productions really of the moment? There are some terrific people joining me for this discussion tonight. Some of them you will know, and some of them, all of them, you certainly should know. The first person I'd like to introduce to you is Christopher Oscar Peña. Christopher is a storyteller originally from California, now residing in New York and LA. He has written some incredible work and has worked at places like Playwrights Horizons, of course, the Goodman Theater, the Public, Two Rivers, Intar, Ontological Hysteric Incubator, which is one of my favorite names of a company, the Playwrights Ram and Rattlesnake, to name just a few. He's a 2-time Sundance Institute Theater Fellow, and he's also had fellowships at the Lark Play Development Center, and was a recipient of the Latino Playwrights Award. In television, Christopher was a writer on Jane the Virgin, one of the shows that I really loved, and also has written for Insecure. I hope you have some tips about the final season. He also writes for a show that is not as well known, but that I really love, Motherland, Fort Salem. And so we're really glad to have you here, Christopher.
Thank you. So excited to be here.
Another favorite playwright of mine is Ike Holter, who's joining us tonight, too. Ike's last play on the stage of the Goodman, back when we could gather in real life, was Lottery Day in 2019. He's also done some incredible work at Teatro Vista and Jackalope and Victory Gardens, Red Arcade, Hit the Wall at the Inconvenience, which was really incredible. He's also done regional work, of course, with Put Your House in Order at La Jolla Playhouse out on the other coast. And he, too, works in TV. One of the most recent, probably, things that you might have seen is Fosse Verton, which I loved because it was Fosse and it was Verton. So
thank you.
It was fabulous. And so I am thrilled that you are able to be with us and really be able to talk about sort of this convergence of theater and film. Ike has also written radio plays, and so I hope that we'll have a chance to talk about that too. Of course, playwrights write the words, but without incredible actors, they just sort of live on the page. And we have one of our really incredible actors and part of the Goodman family, Mary Beth Fisher, with us tonight. Mary Beth made her debut in Marvin's Room back in 1993 at the Goodman Theater. She's done, and she was 15 at that time when she did that show. You're quite welcome. If you come to the Goodman, you have seen her in some incredible work. You saw her in one of my all-time favorite productions, The Little Foxes, in Blind Date, in Luna Gale, Clean House, Vanya and Sonia and Masha and Spike, Design for Living, Light Up the Sky, you name it. She's done it all. She's also done TV and film, which is incredible as well. So you've probably seen her on the large screen. Mary Beth was an inaugural Lunt Fontaine Fellow at Tim Chimney's Foundation, representing the Goodman, and she is also a Beinecke Fellow at Yale University. So thank you very much, Mary Beth, for joining us. And of course, last but not least, is Susie Schultz. Susie is the executive director of the Museum of Broadcast Communications, longtime journalist, longtime friend as well. Susie will talk a little bit more about the museum, but its mission is all about education. The museum is designed to use the extensive archives to make history relevant today while informing our future. And the question that they really want to talk about at the museum is to think about whether or not the power and impact of broadcast industries, if we understand that, and whether or not radio, television, digital, film continue to have that power and affect the way that we think about the world. And I think about some of the incredible TV that we have seen as we've been locked in our homes over the last time, and how it has brought not just real life into our homes, thinking about last summer and the incredible sort of racial reckoning that we had after the murder of George Floyd, but also how it has changed society over time. I think about when I was a kid back in the Pleistocene era, there was the first time I ever saw anyone who was gay on TV was in a show called Love, Sydney that starred Tony Randall. Tony Randall. He was never mentioned as gay,
right?
But it was definitely coded, and that was just an incredible experience for a little kid growing up in Dallas, Texas. So thank you all so much for being here. I wanna start with you, Susie. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the history of theater and drama as we know it in a theatrical context, on TV? I think about the incredible Playhouse 90, which was something that my family and I watched when I was a kid. So can you talk a little bit about that and give us a little history of that relationship?
I will do my best, Ms. Willa. I'm really, really happy to be here. When you think about it, the majority, what I think is fascinating is that we spend so much time with radio, television, and digital, right? It affects our lives. We now take it around and it's in our pocket, but I don't always know if we think about the impact of it. And when we talk about television started in the 1940s, and it didn't start with networks. Networks came later. It started with regional television, right? So Chicago, the Chicago School of Television, when I first came to the museum, I asked some of our curators who are just wonderful with the things that we have, our artifacts. I said, okay, so tell me really, what is the story of Chicago? How do we describe Chicago television? And this wonderful man, Jim, looked at me and said, Susie, it's really the art of doing incredibly fun and entertaining things with absolutely positively no money.
Sounds a lot like theater.
Yeah. So it was peppered in all of these regions, in all of these cities where it started, with creative and improvisational people. If you look at Studd's Place when it began, The scripts were maybe a couple paragraphs, and it was Studs Terkel at his bar bringing all these people in, right? Dave Garroway, who ended up going to the network on the Today Show, was considered a star and a talent because what he did was he would say, hey, let's go take the camera. Come on, follow me over here and let me show you what's going on over here. He didn't have a set. So while this was creative genius, it was necessity as well, right? And then we had Kukla, Fran, and Ollie as well, which was also improv, but was also considered, was one the first show to be popular with both children and, as we like to say, the literati of the world, right? Because it was so intellectual and interesting and fun. And the first 2 years of network came in 1947 and 49. And then all shows were filmed live in New York. There was no videotape. Wow. There was something called kinescope. And kinescope is a very fancy word to say they put the camera up to the TV and they turned it on. And then they got this kind of grainy mix of all sorts of different things. So what we were seeing was live performances in the 40s, 50s. And that was all. And you think about it, too, there were no seasoned TV writers at that point, right? There was nobody who was writing, turn back and say, okay, teach me how to do this. So they were going to writers. They were going to the people who were aspiring to do this. And by 1950, and they also, I love this, they did not call it dramas. They did not call it plays. They called it anthologies or adaptations.
Oh, interesting.
So whenever you're looking up information on TV, you have to always look for
I see you. Mm-hmm.
So by 1950, again, think about this, 47, 49 is when it started. By 1950, there were 14 anthology programs on the air. Wow. 14. Because think, again, they had to take these plays or they had to take previous works and fill up time. And a lot of this had to do, some of these names will tell you who was producing them. The Kraft Theater, right? The Kraft Theater Hour, and they really agonized over, this was one of the most popular 1 hour shows. They all started at 1 hour. And after the 1950s, some of them came down to 30 minutes. And there was this fight, as I think there always is, with the critics. If it was a 1 hour show and it was not Hollywoodized, because there was still a fight with Hollywood and TV. Originally, Hollywood was trying to get the TV shows to be their networks. They wanted to be the distribution point. But the radio stations won. It had something to do with some government interference and a little war called World War II. But it ended up that the radio networks that had formed did not want to let Hollywood in on this stuff.
And the networks really, a lot of the networks actually came from radio, right? That then sort of adapted to television.
Right.
And when you talk about that how the shows went from an hour to a half hour, that was one of the things that also made Playhouse 90 unique, right? Because it went from an hour to an hour and a half.
So again, there's as I've counted them, and I don't think I have an exact count, I counted somewhere in the neighborhood of 25, 30 of these different shows, various shows. The 30-minute stuff was considered more Hollywoodized. So it was not considered favorable by the critics, although it was very popular with people. The 1 hour shows and high dramas, and some of them were, I talked today to a gentleman named Michael Pressman, who is a producer, does a lot of television, has done movies and films. He's been in Chicago. I met him met him virtually in Chicago while he was doing the Chicago Med. His father was part of the Actors Studio, David Pressman, and he produced shows for TV from the Actors Studio. And he also then ended up having some issues with being blacklisted. Issues. As in nobody would hire him, and it was a horrible period of time. But as he came back, he was given the Esso Theater, which was to highlight regional plays. And we're talking about great works and great culture. But there was always constantly this pull and tug between the advertisers, because the Kraft show was J. Walter Reynolds. They were the advertising agency. And so nobody wanted to push too far on these things. We could do maybe, we can do Shakespeare, but do we have to do the violence? So, and how
some really great stuff came out of that, right? I mean, Requiem of a Heavyweight came was a teleplay? Or
And that is when things started to get really interesting, because at a certain point, the teleplays and the adaptations were written so well and were doing so well, and there was so much talent behind them with the producers that Hollywood came calling for them. 12 Angry Men, Requiem for a Heavyweight, and several other productions that really, again, started in television, but they had great talent doing this. And they had people like John Frankenheimer, who was considered like the Orson Welles of his day. In that trajectory in the 20s, he made it really big. And he's the one that he directed a series called Danger, which was about crime, but it was theatrical and it was live. And then he's the one that moved a lot of things as he moved with his career over to Hollywood. So there's a fascinating history. And what I found interesting when talking to Michael today about this is he said that, because I asked too, we always look at the museum to say, okay, that history is fascinating and wonderful and we really want to understand it. But what's the through line here? What's the line here where we come and it affects us right now? And what we're seeing is that, there are forays into trying to do this. There was a live. I think the ER series did one of their opening series live, and then
it was real good. I watched
that.
Cool.
Yeah,
It was real good.
Yeah.
There's always, and that when it's live, there's that tension as well.
Right.
And so you are on your seat and you don't want to miss it.
Right.
But what he said was that, he's been filming here in Chicago during COVID and the strict protocols. He said you had to do things, again, very fast because, of course, and you'll know this better, Mary Beth, than I do, the actors were only allowed to have their masks off for 10 minutes at a time. And so he said you're doing these three camera shoots, trying to get as many things as you can in a very quick amount of time. And he said it harkened back to, some of the things that his father was talking about. Plus what he said is that when you look at people who are directing and who are in theater and go into television, some of the best film directors have that theater background, TV directors, because in essence, whenever you have a play, while there may be technical and crazy, wonderful things going on, it's really all about the people and the story, right? And so for the directors who understand that it's about getting the best of that story out of the actors, that's when the stuff is really great. And so he said some of the best theater that he's seen has also been on television.
Yeah. And I think that you mentioned how because there were no essentially television writers, they were pulling from the theater to bring in these incredible scripts. We see that today too. I mean, Christopher and Ike, you started on stage and have moved to other mediums, but that's happening with a lot of playwrights, right? I mean, a lot of partly for economics. Let's be clear, the kind of living that you can make as a television and a film writer is not quite comparable to what you make as a playwright, except maybe if you're Shakespeare, So, but a lot of the really incredible drama that we've seen, especially during the pandemic, has come from stage writers. And so how do you think about, talk about a little bit about what has shifted for you to make it possible for you to go from stage to screen? What are the similarities and the differences in the writing?
I do want to go first? Or I will say that to answer the first part of your question, I think people say this a lot. There's a real renaissance right now. There's a golden age of TV writing. And I think a lot of that is because of TV becoming more auteur driven. And I think that has a lot to do with playwrights, because playwrights have strong voices that generally more traditional TV writers didn't. And so I think we're seeing a lot of playwrights go to TV, financially, obviously, but because I think they really can make an impact on the shows they're creating. And also, not to go straight to it, I'm sure I will have an opinion as well, but I think we talk about race in the theater and entertainment a lot. And I think whether it's because they have more money or because there's just more opportunity. I think TV is moving slightly more quickly in terms of realizing that it is a huge problem, that white people can't be the only ones telling stories. And so for a lot of us in the theater, it feels like, why am I banging on this theater's door to make $40 and have 50 people see this play when I can go to LA and make more money than they will ever make and have 1 million people have it happen much more quick turnaround. So I think a lot of it has to do, for a lot of us playwrights, certainly people of color, because there's just more opportunity for us right now.
Yeah, I think about what you spoke about in an article that you did, an interview that you did in American Theater, when you really referenced sort of how we had, dozens of millions of people in the street. And there was all this talk about reconciliation and what is going to come back on stage. And what we're seeing certainly in New York coming back on stage does not necessarily reflect the racial reckoning that we had.
Sure. I mean, I just also happen to be in Minneapolis right now, and there's all this energy that is still here post Floyd. But yeah, I mean, for me personally, in about 2019, I was actually having a show at the Goodman, and I had a show coming up at another theater a couple months after that, and I was like, you know what? This is it for me for a second. And it wasn't for my lack of love for the stage. I was like, the way that I'm being paid, I can't sustain this. As someone in my 30s, this is ridiculous. So I had been already planting the seeds of, I want to do this television thing. And that's around the time that Fosse came out. And then the next year, I had no excuse but to say, I'm not, I'm not going to check in on these play commissions. I'm going to try to get out of as many of them as I can. I'm going to start working with TV and film. But it is very interesting that it's if you are not a New York-based person, you have to fight for a lot of different opportunities. But now with TV dissolving this kind of idea that you have to be in Los Angeles, of course, more theater people are jumping to do that because they can do it from the comfort of their own house now, or they can do a mini room, which isn't I was raised to think that you either move to LA or New York to write something and you're there and you live there. You have to be there because your show takes 9 months to write. But I did a room that was 3 months and I went right back home. Do you know what I mean? So this, it is changing and it's a lot better. But also, going back to the idea of last summer, people gave literal demands and those demands weren't met. So it's there's no problem with people saying, why would I make 4 months rent doing 2 years work when I can live for 8 years off 6 months? So these Black and brown writers who should be fought over by these institutions are I don't know if I want to have conversations, so I would prefer not to work with these people. And instead of still fighting, those people are like, theater's my love. I can do this whenever I want, but I need money to survive. And the storytelling in theater is, there's no comparison. Basically what I'm saying is something like Watchmen, something like When They See Us. I'm not seeing that stuff on any stage. You know what I mean? So all these writers who should be writing for these great theater houses in these great cities, it's not even a seduction. TV is we are going to pay you your work and you're going to talk about what you want to talk about. And that's why I don't really see a huge difference when I'm working on TV than film or et cetera, et cetera. It's we're writers write. Obviously there's different rules if you go into different mediums, but they're not that different once you get down to it. So the things I'm working on right now, I'm one of them I pitched to a company and they put me in a ring around for 2 years. And then instantly within talking to this streaming company, it was greenlit within a week and they paid me more than anyone ever would have made to produce the project. I was like, this is such a frustrating agreement, but it is happening. And that means theater is going to not lose voices, but people are going to prioritize differently, I think, which is good because we'll watch it on our TV anyway. We will still get these voices.
Do you think that situation was exacerbated by the pandemic? Or was that always coming? That was sort of the trajectory that we were always on.
I think it was always coming, but I think it helped us. I mean, because we we could stay home and write, but it's am I going to stay home and write a play that, for instance, I have a play that is theoretically being produced that was going to be announced before the pandemic, and right now they're it might be next season or it might be 3 years from now, and I'm I literally am why would I have to write a play again if I'm not going to see it for 5 years when I can literally go write 3 pilots over the pandemic and make $500,000 even if they never get made? You know what I mean? It's just when you talk about numbers like that, it's almost insulting to like go knock on a theater's door. And the other thing that I think is really important to note is the reality is 10 years ago, you were like writing on Law and Order, which is great if you love that, that's what you're gonna do. But like, we're not writing on Law and Order, right? We're writing on shows that are actually giving us opportunity to really write about what we believe in and tell that to the world. So there's no like downgrade to doing that for us.
There's and I think we both grew up at that time where they're like, oh, do you want to work on this network stuff? And now I'm like, shows like Atlanta, shows like Insecure, these are shows that everyone in the world is watching. They have so much value, they get Peabody Awards. So then the conversation becomes like, I don't see myself doing a new play for a long time. But when I do it, it's like, oh, I now have a different set of like standards that I think the room needs to do. Because, you know, when you go to a situation where you're talking about things with race, with like literal millionaires who run these studios, and they're like, I'm not flinching, I'm hiring you because I'm trusting you to be here. But that situation in theater, just the fear around anything that's different, TV is doing things that theater is terrified to do. And I think that's just really exciting.
Yeah.
So, Mary Beth, I want you to weigh in on this. So writers write, essentially, right? And you will write from your apartment, you will write in a writer's room, you will write and rewrite every night if you're working on a new play. Actors come into a situation because they have a script and they've been cast in the script. Is it different when you think about how you walk into the room for first rehearsal for a play at the Goodman than for the first table read when you're working on a series or a film?
Oh, I'm always a nervous wreck when I have to work in front of a camera. It's really hard to relax. I mean, and I think it's because I don't know if it's true for everybody, but even at my advanced age, to work in front of a camera is stressful. And I'm not sure why. And except I think it's because I didn't grow up with it. When I was in school studying to be an actor, you did theater. That's what you did. That was the life that I was trained to do. So television and film came to me later. And so I wasn't trained for it. I had to figure it out on my own kind of and through observation. So it's to me, I usually feel pretty relaxed when I walk into a theater for a first rehearsal because I know I'm going to be given time. And, and hopefully the writer's going to be in the room. I've done a lot of new plays and, it's really fun when the writer's there and, you can collaborate together. And time is everything. In television and film, you have less time, generally. And that just always makes me a little less relaxed in general because I'm nervous that I'm not going to come up with it. So there's a lot of advanced preparation, more so, I think, for television and film for me than there is for a play for those reasons, because I'm a nervous wreck.
So in this amalgam of live that we did, how did you had both a little bit of time in the room like you would normally have, but you also had cameras, right?
Right.
So what was that experience like?
I got to say that my friend, the wonderful playwright, James Still, said to me when he saw the sound inside, this is what he said, it was like a novella makes love to a play and they have a baby that's both film and television, which I thought was so fabulous because that's exactly what it was. And
so first, you should probably explain what the sound inside was.
Oh, the sound inside. Well, was Adam the sound inside is a play by Adam Rapp, which was on Broadway. Was running on Broadway when the pandemic hit and had to be shut down. The Goodman got the rights to it to inaugurate their live series. So it was a live production in the Owen Theater. with 3 television cameras following us around. And we, I didn't know what it was going to be. I mean, this was a new thing. I'd never done anything like this. I hadn't done a play for the camera. So, I did a boatload of preparation beforehand in terms of kind of getting off book, because it was 55 pages of mostly me flying on, and that's a lot. And it was really language heavy. Mm-hmm. So I spent a solid 3.5 weeks every single day, about 5 hours a day, learning the script, because I knew myself well enough to know that when the cameras were up my nose, I was going to flip out. So I wanted to be as prepared as possible. And just in terms of the play. And, fortunately, Adam Rapp made himself available to us as well, so that, we were able to talk to him, email him, et cetera, questions. So that was really great. But walking into the room and facing the 3 cameras, who were always literally like here, here, and here, mm-hmm. and really like this close to me most of the time, was really, really super scary. And I was thrown for about 24 hours. And then I got over it, because these guys were so engaged. And what they said to me was, the director of photography for these plays, who you'll get to work with, Ike, on your play, is Gabe Hatfield. And
yes, yeah.
He does all of the Dateline NBC stuff. He's so great. And he said to me, Mary Beth, when we work with journalists, newscasters, when they are addressing the camera, they're talking to the lens. And he said, you're doing something different. We've all noticed, and we're talking about. And they said, you're talking through the lens. And he said, we're kind of freaked out, because we feel you talking to us. And so they started to behave as a character and respond to me. Like if my character was thinking, they'd shift the camera just a little bit. Or if I was, kind of in a state of distress, they might move up or down and try to, be there for me. Right. So it was a really cool relationship that we developed. But part of that was because the play had so much direct address. And I don't know if I haven't read your play, Ike, obviously, so I don't know if you have that in your play, but it works really well in this format. And
mine has a shitload, so that's really good to hear.
Well, so it'll be good. So if you're an actor in a theater and you have direct address, you're addressing the whole population, right? Mm-hmm. And in this situation, direct address became very intimate. And, so many people said to me when they watched it, I really felt like you were talking to me. Mm. And it gave me an acting opportunity that was different. And that was to take this play that I would normally be giving out to, in the case of the Owen Theater, 350 people. You don't have the opportunity to make direct heart contact. Exactly. I mean, you can do it in a broader way, but to be able to look at a camera and know that it's Gabe, it's Matt, it's Eugene, and talk to them and really connect with them and really express myself in a very intimate way was so unique. And I thought it really enhanced the play in a way. I know that Adam saw it. I didn't know when he was going to see it, thank God. But he saw it, and he emailed Bob, who read his email to us backstage the next day, and he said Adam loved it. He said he was moved by his own play, and he thanked us for trusting his play, and really being intimate with it. He loved that. So that was really satisfying.
That's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that that you mentioned about sort of the camera responding to you is something that happened because you had all of these professionals sort of in the room. That's not normally how television happens, right?
Right.
So television normally happens because the writer has sort of written in that kind of direction, correct, into the script,
Mhm.
as opposed to a lot
Well,
of.
I'm not sure. I mean, you guys, I mean, you don't write as the writer, you don't write what the shot is.
Or do you? Because
Or do you?
let's think about. So I want to. We have a couple of things to illustrate. So we have a television script, which was written for a pilot, an unnamed pilot, by Shonda Rhimes, that became Scandal. And so you have that sense of, I don't know how well you can see this, but she sets the interior of it. She sets whether or not it's fading in or fading out. She sets later in the script whether we move, whether we pan and tilt in some of those ways. So she's giving some sense, in the same way that a writer on stage will give some sense of the general atmosphere, right? Of what is supposed to be happening. Now, do you, Ike and Christopher, do you do that in your scripts, or do you leave that completely to the director for the show?
I think it's really show by show basis. I think sometimes I'll be very, very aggressive with a specific image zoomed into a fingernail, and sometimes it's just like somebody's in a room. I think it's really the style of the show. I think the thing that I will say that I think is, and it's changed, this is a weird thing. So I think that traditionally writers before our generation, maybe even the generation before us, I think like the Millers and like, you know, the Tennessee Williams, the people that we grew up on, those people wrote 3-hour plays that were in like one location. I think our generation, and of course we're all different, but like, I think the thing that we really share with television is that we now write plays that have 47 characters and 37 scenes, and some of them are, you know, 3 lines long. And I think that is something that's really happened and is I think it's partially because of TV. And so I think that we are sort of closer to that. And I think that the other thing that I think is sort of like a muscle of TV that I think is stronger is that with TV you have limited time, right? You have to get in and get out. So you're the shorter the scene, the more information you get, the faster. So it's like, you know, Ike writes these beautiful monologues, and I would imagine it's like you have less time to do that on TV. But then we go back to theater and we're like, we're going to go back to those five-page monologues because we have that breath now. But that's what I think is really the real difference. It's sort of the amount of information we can get in on space.
So
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Susie. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, what I find interesting is, you know, when they first started with this, it was let's follow the camera as though it was a stage, right? We're not going to deviate from that. And then as things moved along, there were 3 camera shoots, right? Where one camera to close up, one camera to close up, and the other one whenever there was 2 in the shot. And Studio One, which went from 1948 to 1958, did over 500 plays, was considered very high budget. But also technically, everybody wanted to be on it because technically it was on the cutting edge. It was learning how to move. They were actually hiding the camera. They actually built sets where there was 2 plays, Dry Run and Shakedown Cruise, that were both submarines. and this moved into Playhouse 90, right? So this is 60 minutes, right? And Playhouse 90 comes along, and Playhouse 90 was from 56 to 61, and it decided that it was going to do, 90 minutes, obviously from the name there. And what they found was Playhouse 90 was actually the demise of live theater, because on television, because it was so expensive, because they're escalating up with the technology, and they're combining all these shots, and they're doing all these things, and they have to have the crane, and they have to have this, and they have to have that, and they couldn't do it So it's 56 to 61. And about that time, they're like, this is plus the amount of controversy, because unlike what you all are talking about, the roles were flipped in that it was the controversy was seen on stage. That was where there was intellectual thought. There was, let's get the big subjects out there. But there's no way that if you're trying to sell craft cheese that you want to talk about, race and everything. They very carefully made sure they had these shots for commercials of just hands. They didn't even want to show a person. Of course, it was a white person, but they didn't want to show. They didn't want to show what where did she come from? What did your hair look like? So they showed for all these people's hands just preparing food. So the technical part of this to me is just fascinating how it bows and it moves to different periods. So I'm sorry, I just had to add that in, but.
And everything, in some ways, everything old is new again, right? Because we go from radio and a completely audio version into now pictures and audio with TV. And then now we're moving into podcasts, which podcasts are huge, but it's all audio going back into that time. And theater coming back because of the pandemic, back into primacy in a virtual environment.
Mm-hmm.
So Ike, when you, I think it's particularly interesting because I Hate It Here, right, started really as sort of an audio piece.
Yeah, I was commissioned like second month of the pandemic by Studio Theater, and they were like, "Do you want to write something for this?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm not going to write a play though." And they're like, "That's fine, it just has to be for audio." So it's like, cool. So I wrote all these. I compare it to like a concept album where it's like, oh, there's all these like really dramatic things, but they're you are not listening to an album, it's a story on top of this. So with I Hate It Here, it's like you're listening to monologues and songs and some scenes, and there's 3 scenes that are about an Uber theme, and it gets pressed a bit more and more, but none of the characters connect, they're all set in different whatevers. But yeah, my thing the past year was I'm one of these people where I'm like, oh no, I believe there's a line of division with theater, TV, and how we talk about them. So when we started to talk about doing it at Goodman, I was like, oh no, this is still not a play. This is now a TV special. So I started watching all these old great TV specials. I watched the Liza one, I watched the Barbara one, I watched episodes of the Muppets. I wanted to get that vaudevillian feel of like turning on your TV in the 50s, and it's like, and the guest host is this, and they're going to have like, like a romantic scene, and there will be like a thing in front of a curtain where they do, So Lillian Brown, who's an amazing director, she's really having fun saying, like, obviously there's no audience here, so but what elements of theatricality can we actually bring to this old school element, which was a mix of doing theater shows that were filmed, what like old school tech elements. I'm not even gonna spoil it. Y'all will be like, oh, I haven't seen that shit in decades. but she's having so much fun saying, cool, so this is the frame of this is now a TV special. It lives in this box. So I'm just cutting a bunch now. I'm like rearranging scenes. And I'm trying to give people that weird experience because it is so unusual. And I've done a lot of like theatrical stuff throughout the pandemic with Zoom and all this other stuff. But I don't see it actually going away. And I don't see that there's a reason for it. I'm like, I don't call it theater, but it is a completely theatrical element that I think has yet to get a really good name, but it is something we'll be doing with the rest of our lives. Like kids on TikTok, that is a form of like a theatrical conversation. Once people name it in about 5 years, they'll be more comfortable saying, oh, I'm not doing a Zoom play. I'm doing this experience that you watch, which X, Y, and Z, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, we have really nerdy stone conversations about I Hate It Here with, well, but what is this scene actually doing? And I think when you finally see it, it'll be like a cool jolt.
It's so interesting that you bring up TikTok because it is the cultural capital of the moment for everybody that I know who is younger than 20 years old.
Yeah.
And how they don't see a difference between creating for TikTok, creating in a playwriting class, creating something that they're going to put up on, they're going to curate on Instagram, thinking about how they're going to sort of record this audio and do a podcast. All of that for them is sort of the creative curatorial process. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting about something you said, Ike, about sort of this time we're in and coming out of it. You said in the American Theater article that theaters haven't really changed fast enough the way other industries are changing, like music, film, and television. Can you talk a little bit more? Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think that's very true, and I think that unless we figure out a way to change, we will only be playing to the 800 people a night as opposed to the thousands of people that we play to when we do film and TV.
Sure. I mean, I think some really actually positive, good things happened too within this whole year and a half long insane cluster. Fuck, I'm not sure if I can swear in here, but I just did. I'm sorry.
And you have in the past, so.
Okay. Well, then, we are keeping continuity with that. Yeah, wait, what was the question again? It was about things changing fast enough and how we fix that, right?
Yeah.
What I was really excited about last year was seeing how corporates things respond. You know how on Twitter they have a corporate voice where it's like, actually, we're your cool Aunt Joan. We just blew in town for the weekend. We have a few comments about this. But corporations like Skittles and Twix got really good whenever anything happened, saying, just FYI, we stand with you. Just FYI, we're here in the background. And, it is weird. It's a weird feeling. But what was weirder was that a lot of theaters didn't say anything until they were prodded. Do you have anything to say about this? These people are doing a bad job. We know you do a good job. You do shows about these things that are happening in the world. And I would say 70% of the theaters that I love had a really hard time having those conversations. And then you start looking at how many white people are on the boards, and there's this uniform story going on. And it's oh, you can't move fast enough because everyone here, y'all went to the same schools, y'all go to the same parties, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas with theater and, film and music and all these other things, there's a high success rate of saying the audience is correct. And when the world is getting more and more diverse, we live in a majority city in Chicago. Almost 60% of the people here are of color. I think it's a little bit over. So it's in this city, if the the places of industry that don't reflect that are just slower at responding, because in my opinion, they don't have all the best people working there. I mean, if your office isn't representing the racial numbers of a place where there's more Black and brown people, then you're not going to get the fastest responses because you're going to have to call a Black person. You're going to have to call a Latinx person. We're not even going to get into it. But I think the way that changes is people saying, you know what? Everyone's saying the same thing, which is we're having the same conversation because a lot of old white men maybe don't make the best decisions in the world and history. So once that starts breaking down, and once people in TV are actually, we're going to diversify who we hire with agents, there's so many more layers of changing in these larger corporations. And I think theater, because it is a community-based place, it's really easy to look down the hall instead of having to call 50 people. It's does everyone here look like me? Do we all go to the same schools? Maybe we need more help figuring out this new world, because coming back from the pandemic, it's not just going to be everyone's first show back and it's done. It's going to be a 5-year process of people feeling safe, of people learning new ideas, of people changing and saying, I want to go to a place that reflects the changes that I'm going through. So I actually think it's really exciting, and there's new theaters popping up, and people just being excited to say, we can wake up tomorrow and change. This is a terrible thing that happened, but if we go back to doing the same thing, we haven't learned. We have to learn. So yeah, I mean, I'm optimistic about it, but at the same time, it is I'm not seeing a lot of it happening, is what I'm saying, but I hope it does change.
Well, one of the things that you mentioned is how we think of it as community. And one of the criticisms has been about sort of theater on Zoom, theater in the virtual community, in the virtual world, is that we can't necessarily create community in that way. I'm not sure that that's true.
It's not.
I think about How to Catch Creation. So How to Catch Creation by Christina Anderson. We did it 2019. It was a show that we brought student audiences in to see. So in the whole run of the show, maybe 1,600 young people from around the city got a chance to see it. But we streamed that show when we went out into the pandemic, and all of our teachers used that show in a variety of ways to pull in families to talk about incarceration and show it out of school time. to talk about issues of homophobia in the Black community, to talk about all of these different things in ways that we could never do in the theater. And one of the things that it made us realize is that we always need to have a kind of virtual presence, no matter what the show is. So I'm curious to ask each of you if you think that theater will always now have to live as a hybrid, that there will be people who will only come to the theater, that is how they know it, but there will also be people who will want it to come into their homes in a way.
I have super aggressive opinions about this. And the first is that I think, yes, this is important because it gives access to so many people who, for 100 million reasons that we all know, can't be at the theater. So for that very important reason, that should exist. I think this other question of like, what is theater? Like, you know, Mary Beth, I haven't seen your version of that play, I've seen it before. And so part of me was like, oh, I feel like it's not a traditional play, so it fits into this new version in a cool way. But what I have felt is, what I'm not interested in personally is watching people try to record plays and put it on Zoom. What I am interested in is, we have this new way to create theater. What is the intentional way to create art? And actually, I gotta say, like, I did see your or hear your studio thing, and I think you, over the pandemic, have been really good about intentionally creating stuff. So when it gets on, it doesn't feel like dated or forced, or like you're trying to make a play into something it's not. It feels like you're like, this is a new language that I can use to my advantage.
Oh,
and
thank you.
I think that is, if we do that, I'm super excited about it. I think let's not try to like box a play into Zoom. I think let's try to use this new thing we have and create new mediums to connect with our audiences.
Yeah, it is a new medium though, and you're absolutely correct. People who are like, oh, we'll do this on this without changing anything. I mean, that's how you get a movie like the film version of The Producers that's not the Mel Brooks one. It's like, oh, it'll work here. It's like, no, you gotta watch out. The audience will not react the same way, I believe me. Also, I have one really quick hangover question. Not hangover, but it's from like 10 minutes. You know, far back question. So when they were doing these performance 90s shows, did they have an audience there, or was it like a sound stage? They're doing the play, they're recording it.
I'm not positive about all of them. I'm not sure about the evolution. It started out that they did not have audiences there, because they weren't sure really how to control the sound as much. You know, they and it wasn't, now you want to see the audiences, right? That's a whole different ethos. But before, they were so worried about. I think the way we describe things early is, things were very primitive, right? They were just really trying to get this content on there. And what I love now is that, you know, the broadcast industry in general, whether it is radio, television, or digital, is a disruptor, total disruptor. You just have to, you know, everybody had a radio and they're sitting in front of the radio. And then all of a sudden, no, wait a minute, I don't have a television. Now I have a black and white television. Now I need a color television. What do you mean I need to be on social media? What do I need to be? What is this TikTok? And we all, for me, the disruption is, and I know this sounds so cliche, like, you know, my therapist told me to say this, but and she didn't, that it is, the disruption causes you to get outside of your comfort zone, and it makes you think, and it builds creativity. So I actually hope, as well as what you're saying, what two gentlemen before me have said, is that this does keep going, because I think there are so many other I mean, I love the fact that if you're going to study plays from here on in, there's a certain period where you better be on Twitter and looking at how the authors have talked about their plays and looking at how things have evolved that way. I like the evolution, and I like the fact that the evolution means more access. It means more difference in terms of who is able to create. I don't just have to create a classical musical production that I have studied in, you know, I can do something else.
Yes.
So,
and, you know, I'm going to echo too about accessibility, just based on the people I personally knew who watched The Sound Inside. The people I knew who watched it were from 15 states
Wow.
and 6 different countries.
Yes.
And so I had people in Sweden watching a 2:00 matinee, which was 8 p.m. their time, and texting me with incredible excitement a screenshot of Live from the Goodman going, "Oh my God, I'm in Homestead watching Chicago theater." And they couldn't have been more excited. So that's really pretty cool.
That is so
Yeah.
cool.
That is so cool. And I think that I hope that is something that we carry out into the future with us, that has come out of this sort of horrible time that we have been in. Ike?
I just really quickly wanted to co-sign that. I have a lot of friends who have physical disabilities, and a lot of friends who can't go on the one night where there's open caption person. They're so
Right.
thankful that theaters are actually saying, "Thank you for taking down this wall. We should be able to access these plays that we can't pay $90 for. We can pay $10 for them if you give them to us." But I think so much of as someone who tried to break into writing for TV, I couldn't show them anything from my 14 plays. But the fact that all these shows are recorded, I'm like, yes, these archives are like important, not just for like educating people, but for the people in it. It's like, this is our legacy. It's part of our work. I just think it's really cool, and it lets it be available for people all over the world. I think it's so cool. But just the idea of someone who's like, I can't physically go in there because of my condition, but I should have the right to watch that 2 p.m. matinee from my house. I promise I won't put it on the black market.
Yeah. And I hope that certainly the way that HBO Max has both put things in, allowed things to be in theaters as we're coming back into real life, but also allowed them to be at home so that I can make a choice about where I want to go, is a lesson that theaters can learn. And especially theatrical unions, because often it's not about the theater. It is about the larger entities and the systems that make sort of theater possible. So I hope that is something that a lesson that we take into the future to change how we think about theater and about creation in the way that a lot of my young people do, that we are telling stories and it doesn't really matter so much about the medium.
Yes.
I am so thrilled and so grateful for this time that we've had together. Thank you so much, Christopher Oscar Peña, Ike Holter, Mary Beth Fisher, Susie Schultz. Thank you all for joining us for this. I hope that you will take advantage of Live from the Goodman with seeing the Ohio State Murders, which starts this week, and then Ike's play, I Hate It Here, and hopefully many more opportunities to see theater virtually in the future from the Goodman. Thank you all so much. I want to also thank Lena Romano and Rachel Jimenez, who have been back behind the scenes to make it possible for us to do this, and all of the staff and the artists at the Goodman who make all of this possible. Thank you very much. Thank you, and good night.
Thanks, Willa.
Thank you.
you.